Hello, I'm Emily Bellet, founder of Vestpod and author of You're Not Broke, You're Pre-Rich. Welcome to The Wallet and our new 7-episode mini-series where we take your most pressing questions to financial advisors. In this episode, together with financial planner Abigail Banks, we tackle the often misunderstood and stressful topic of debt. We know it can feel overwhelming and like it's weighting you down, but it doesn't have to feel that way. We discuss the different types of debt that women face, as well as strategies for paying it off and avoiding common misconceptions. Whether it's student loans or mortgages, we provide tips and advice for effectively using and managing debt at every stage of life. Join us as we address common misconceptions about debt and share insights on how to avoid falling into these traps. We also discuss the types of debt you should steer clear of and provide resources for obtaining support on your debt repayment journey. Each of our financial journeys is unique, and we all need a little help along the way. But where do we find trusted advisors, and how do we know whether they'll be useful for us? Unbiased does all that heavy lifting for you. Say goodbye to stressful, time-consuming vetting processes and searches. Unbiased will match you with the best advisor for you. Whether you're looking for specific financial advice or simply want to check out your options, unbiased.co.uk has all the tools you need to support you on your financial journey. Remember that we are not certified financial advisors. Information shared in this podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.
I'm almost 26 and I have tens of thousands of pounds in student loan debt, plus over £100,000 in a Help to Buy loan, which I needed to take out to buy my first property. I don't consider either of these two debts bad debt because I needed one to get an education and one to have somewhere to live. However, I hear a lot of conflicting opinions about which debt to prioritise because the student loan has such a high interest rate. And I also hear things about how I should be leveraging credit card debt, which is something that I don't do. Because I hear a lot of horror stories about people who rack up credit card debt, and so I steer clear.
I just wanted to start with, what are the different types of debt, maybe the most common types of debt that women or anyone tend to face, and how they're different from one another?
I think the first is probably student loans. And for me, it's not really a traditional debt. I think of it more of a tax on earned income above a certain threshold, because until you earn above the threshold set by the government, you don't need to start making any repayments on that. And it will ultimately be written off after a certain period of time. It also doesn't impact your ability to borrow or your credit score. It does impact your surplus income because naturally a percentage of your income is being taken before tax to pay off the debt. But I think it is more of a tax, really. There is unsecured debt. So this is things like credit cards. So they are not secured against an asset like a property or covered by a guarantor. So, for example, your house can't be repossessed if you don't make the repayments on the credit card. But the credit card company could take legal action or, seize belongings if you fail to make those repayments. There's also secured debt. So this is a mortgage, which is probably the most common example. So this is where the lender takes a legal charge against your property. So they often have, a very, very long term. It's a very normal part of our society, particularly in the UK. We love buying property. Very, very normal. If you fail to keep up with the payments on a mortgage, your home is potentially at risk and could be repossessed. So there is that risk attached. And I guess the last one is probably informal debt, so family debt. If you take a loan from a parent, for example.
If you see someone struggling with debt or I guess having a higher balance of unsecured debt, so maybe, credit cards or overdraft, and they need to start paying off this debt because it's also quite expensive, but they don't have a lot of extra money. How can they actually get started?
I think it really comes down to budgeting and prioritizing certain outgoings. So other expenses may need to decrease, so particularly discretionary spend, holidays or eating out. And that probably needs to be a short period of time. If it's particularly an overdraft or a credit card debt, maybe tightening your budget for a little bit will allow you just to start making a good dent in that debt or overdraft. And it will become really normal, I think, as you start working to that budget. Within a couple of months, it will feel like this is your normal pattern of expenditure. So it's just starting it, and then it will become really kind of habit to do it.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of debt charities that are actually brilliant if you need some support and help you put in place like a repayment plan and have some emotional support, I guess. You mentioned like all these like common types of debts, and all these debts will have like different level of interest. You will have like a different repayment plan with each of them. So question I'm often asked is, which debt should I actually pay first? And I think there's a specific debate around student loans, because student loans have a very high interest rate. You don't often like look into it, but people are like, maybe I shouldn't pay it first, because what if a future government decides to eliminate or write off like everyone's student debt? So how do you advise your clients on which debt to tackle first?
Yes, so I think it all comes down to the risks associated with those debts. So for me, priority is always mortgage first, and that's really because if you can't or don't pay your mortgage, your house may be repossessed. And if you have a young family or, dependents living with you, that's a really serious position to be in. So for me, mortgage is always first.
And you're talking about the interest on the mortgage, not making any early repayments.
Exactly.
Like
so
that.
Just your standard monthly repayments and interest payments on there. And then I think after that, it's credit card. It is unsecured, but obviously there are consequences on that as well. And the interest rates are very, very high on a credit card. If if you're not on a 0% balance, that they are extortionately high. So paying those down is very important. And then for me, student loans would be last, purely because again, it's more like an income tax rather than actually a debt. And if you lost your job, for example, you wouldn't need to keep paying off that student loan. It would just stop until you started work again and started earning above the threshold. But your credit cards and mortgage obviously are still there. So that for me, they're definitely the priority.
What are some of the common misconceptions about debt, and how can women avoid falling into these traps?
Yes, I think debt has really negative connotations associated with it, and probably rightly so in some circumstances. For me, I think debt is actually a really it's just another tool that's in your kit to be used alongside savings, pensions, etc. It's really not appropriate for everyone. It always comes down to affordability, but it can be really helpful. I think the primary example is buying, your first home or another home. Mortgages really allow you to do that, particularly given house prices and the increases we've seen over, the past 10 years. So I would always recommend speaking to a mortgage advisor just to understand your options and the implications of going down a particular route. And even if you don't go ahead, at least you're really well informed and you can make a decision whether it's the right time for you to take on that debt or not, and be as informed as you can about it. Lastly, I think credit cards as well. Again, bad connotations, but you can get some really attractive benefits as long as you manage that debt and pay it off every month. You can build up air miles, for example, on certain credit cards, and you can build up a really strong credit score because what you're evidencing is that you can take on debt and pay it off each month. So it's a really great way to build up a strong credit score if you manage it appropriately.
Now, if we talk about the debts you should probably avoid, what do you have on your list?
Yeah, so I think probably unnecessary debts. And what I mean by that is, debt is not to be taken on lightly. And for me, it's very much you take it on because it's achieving a specific purpose and often a big life event, such as a house purchase. Definitely heard stories of people, building up really large balances on high interest credit cards because they're buying, discretionary items that perhaps they didn't need. So I think you really need to stop and think, and, do I need these items and can I actually afford to pay off this debt? And if you can't, probably don't go through with it, because you've got to think about long-term consequences of taking on that debt.
How can women balance the need to pay off debt with other important financial goals, such as saving for retirement or buying a house?
Yeah, so I think it's a balancing act, and it's firstly trying to identify what are your short, medium and long-term objectives. And I think a really helpful way of doing this is by looking at some cash flow forecasting. So ultimately, what am I trying to achieve in the next 5, 10, 15 years plus? And it will allow you to start understanding how you should allocate your income into different pots. So perhaps paying off, you can overpayments on a mortgage if you want to pay that down in the short term, saving into a pension for the long term. And you can really allocate your income to meet those objectives that you set out for yourself. I really get asked quite a lot when someone inherits a lump sum, for example, whether they should pay off their mortgage or invest the money to grow it. And it's such a common question. And for me, I always say to look at it, well, say pure examples, if your interest rate is at 5%, say inflation's at 2% and the cost of investment is going to be 1.5%. You need to achieve a return of 8.5% just to break even, and then the risk that you'll need to take on from an investment point of view to achieve that consistently, it's very high. And for most people, that's outside of their natural tolerance for taking on risk. So I'd say 9 times out of 10, paying off the debt is the most cost-effective way and the lowest risk option.
And when you're in this debt repayment journey, I mean, that can be quite extreme, and you'll need some, real motivation and momentum, because that will allow you to then think about financial security and financial independence. But you may experience a lot of setbacks, unexpected expenses. So how do you keep going when times are pretty hard?
Mm-hmm. No, I think I always tell my clients, I think it's so important to have a cash emergency fund. And I normally say between 6 to 12 months of expenditure. And if that's not possible for somebody, just even putting a little bit of cash aside just to start building it up over time is really important. And it just means, if unexpected expenses do come up, which, they do, life throws things at you, you can use your emergency fund to cover those rather than having to pay it from income or perhaps compromising, other outgoings. So I think starting to build up that emergency fund is a really good starting point. And then just looking at the motivation in becoming debt-free, how amazing is it going to feel when you've got a fully paid off house, for example, or you pay off your credit cards? You're going to feel so fantastic having that, debt lifted off you. So just kind of sticking with it. And again, it comes back to that habit. It will become a really normal pattern of expenditure. You won't even notice it if you set that budget. So it should just become part of your normal outgoings in life.
And what I've seen working quite well also within, the Vestpod community again is women getting together and getting this accountability to, do this to be in this debt repayment journey together. Is it something you've experienced or you've seen?
Yes, I think discussing and supporting each other is so powerful. It just reminds you that, you're not alone. There's other people in very similar situations, and it just gives you the motivation to, keep going. And, you can share kind of tips with each other. So, for example, if you've found a really great budgeting tool or, a good life hack, you can share it with a friend and it will help them on their journey. I think it's so important for us to have a really fluid discussion and just help everyone through, the different financial journeys, really.
Because I feel there's still so much shame around debt, talking about debt, telling people, I'm struggling with finances, I can't pay for this, for that. There's so much of money being a measure of success, status, and all these things that when we say we don't have money, we're struggling with money, we just feel very... that we're losing some sense of being worthy, which I think is still crazy.
Really crazy. And I think, it should never be ashamed, and it's not a permanent state of being, and it can feel really lonely, but I think actually people get into debts for all kinds of reasons, and quite often it's not actually anything bad. It might be they've gone through a relationship breakdown and they need to take on some debt to help them, leave that relationship. So just speaking to friends and family, you just get that emotional support, and it will kind of normalize it as well for you and realize there's probably other people going through it as well, and it will make you feel so much better.
And when we think about sort of avoiding debt, or we're talking about maybe insecure debt, expensive debt, very short-term approach, Do you think it's more a matter of being, very realistic with your budget and stuff? Or is it a little bit of money mindset also?
Yes, I think budget is really important. I think you've got to respect as well the budgets that you set for yourself, because if you set it and stick to it, I think you'll really become used to it. And it is money mindset, ultimately having a mortgage, you're paying off a debt, but it's also allowed you to have a wonderful home and build something as well, which is, you can't measure that really in terms of monetary terms. I think has so many benefits. So I think it's just having checks and balances and trying to respect the boundaries that you've set yourself.
And have you seen the any impact of beliefs around money mindset on how people manage debt or end up actually being into debt? Do you see a relationship between their past and how they react today with their finances?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I definitely had one client, and again, it came down to he didn't have very much growing up, and I think for him having a little bit of money, it allowed him to buy nicer clothes and perhaps present an image that made him feel more comfortable. And it was just him trying to get away from his upbringing, which I don't know if he was ashamed of it, but he it wasn't something he wanted to associate himself with. So I think and he did put money on credit cards, etc. So I think it has a really big impact on the choices that we make. But then I think back to the point of having open conversations with friends and family, perhaps if he'd had discussions and realised that no one was really cared where he came from, perhaps he would have made different decisions. So just having that open discussion on money is so powerful.
Finally, last question. If, someone is feeling helpless, overwhelmed with debt, and it's maybe they're earning money, but they're just spending on something else, or their debt is snowballing because they can't afford the interest, they're spending more. I think it comes from a lot of different, personal challenges. What practical advice would you give them? Yeah,
so I think there's some really great helplines out there. So Citizens Advice, for example, or charities. And they're going to be completely impartial, non-judgmental, and just having a really honest and open discussion about your situation, and they will give you really fantastic guidance to get back on track. And then if you feel comfortable, I think again, not feeling ashamed, talking to your friends and family about it, because they may be able to help. So for example, if you have had a really high interest rate debt and you're really stressed about it, a family member may be willing to give you a loan to kind of ease that. So it's just having those discussions and trying not to feel embarrassed about it, because everybody gets themselves into situations and it's never as bad as you think it is. But I think when you're on your own in a room, it can feel terrible. But just talking about it, you'll get a way to get through it.
Thanks, Abby. Thank you for tuning into this episode of The Wallet. We recognize that discussing money can sometimes be seen as taboo, and we believe in the power of sharing knowledge with friends as a meaningful way to give back. Make sure to click and follow The Wallet on your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss episode 4 airing next Thursday. In this episode, we'll be discussing taxes and addressing the common stress associated with filing tax returns. Tune in to discover top tips that can help you confidently face the fear of tax season. If you enjoyed our show, we would greatly appreciate your support by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Lastly, make sure you mark your calendar for our upcoming live webinar on financial advice on July 20th, where we'll be exploring the ins and outs of working with a trusted advisor. You can sign up for free via the show notes or on Vestpod.com.